It started with the scratchy audio of a frantic 911 call, a shaky breath on the other end, and a single haunting statement, "I think my mom did something to him. Please, you have to hurry. Please." Then the line went dead. Court documents later showed that call was placed at 2:47 a.m. on a muggy summer night from a bungalow buried deep in a row of identical homes on the eastern edge of the city. For months afterward, that recording leaked across social media, fueling speculation, rumor, and half-baked conspiracy theories. It wasn't until the trial began that the public would come face to face with the horror that had sprouted in that quiet neighborhood. A mother who orchestrated an unthinkable crime, a daughter whose name appeared in an obituary but whose body was never recovered, and a boyfriend caught in the grip of a twisted family secret that ended in marriage vows and murder. The entire saga left a trail of text messages, frantic voicemails, canceled wedding invitations, forged death certificates, and one deeply unsettling wedding photograph. The story starts long before that night, in the unremarkable corners of everyday life where small suspicions and unspoken resentments festered. Sienna Caldwell was 17 when she first brought a boy home to meet her mother, Blythe. Every witness who lived on Maplewood Drive said the Caldwells were an enigma, Sienna shy, artistic, and prone to daydreaming. Blythe elegant, poised, with a faint smell of expensive perfume always lingering around her. Neighbors recalled how, years earlier, Blythe had coaxed her husband out of the house, only to file for divorce soon after. Sienna stayed behind, quiet and watchful, never airing her private life in public. According to classmates, Sienna seemed desperate for love, for validation, for an existence that wasn't overshadowed by her mother's intense presence. Blythe was known to attend every parent-teacher conference wearing immaculate dresses that clung to her lithe figure. She looked too young to be a mom of a teenager, and whispers circulated about how she must have had Sienna at a very young age. That rumor was half true. Blythe was only 19 when Sienna was born, a child in the eyes of many, but she had thrived, forging a life that seemed comfortable on the surface. The mother and daughter shared a house that outwardly looked normal enough, but within those walls was a tense dynamic that only heightened once Damian Reeves became Sienna's boyfriend. Sienna met Damian at her after-school art club, where he volunteered to help paint murals at local community centers. He was 19, a tall boy with an angular jaw and a sweet disposition who rarely raised his voice, never smoked, never drank. He was from a strict family across town, had a scholarship to a local college, and by all accounts exuded kindness. When Sienna introduced him to Blythe, she expected her mother's typical dissection. The raised eyebrow, the pointed questions about future goals, the passive-aggressive compliments. But Blythe surprised Sienna by welcoming Damian warmly. Too warmly, perhaps. One friend later commented that Blythe acted more like a classmate with a crush than a mother meeting her daughter's boyfriend. Observers noticed an odd dynamic. Blythe seemed to come alive around Damian, offering refreshments, fussing with her hair, leaning in too close when he spoke. Damian, polite and somewhat naive, took it as kindness. Sienna felt gratified that her mother approved, or so she told friends, until the subtle tension escalated into a terrifying drama. Within a month of that first introduction, Blythe insisted Damian come for dinner almost every evening. She claimed it was to keep Sienna safe and supervised, as Sienna was still a minor, but the atmosphere became more charged. Sienna would watch Blythe giggle at Damian's harmless jokes, watch how her mother's hand would linger on his shoulder, how Blythe would speak about real estate or high-end clothes in a playful, inviting way. Sienna felt overshadowed in her own budding relationship. Confused, she tried to cling to Damian, who was oblivious to Blythe's interest or manipulations, wanting to prove to her mother that this was serious, that they were truly in love. Sienna confided in a friend through text, "I can't tell if I'm being paranoid or if she's flirting with him. She just stares at him like she's studying him." The friend wrote back, "That's super weird, but your mom is hot. Guys always look at her. Maybe she's just being nice." Sienna tried to bury her uneasy feeling in that plausible explanation until the evening. Blythe and Damian spent 3 hours alone in the living room after Sienna fell asleep on the couch. Sienna woke at midnight to find them chatting in hushed voices, Blythe's hand on Damian's knee, though both sprang apart the moment Sienna stirred. That was the first time Sienna felt something roiling in her stomach, a sense that she was losing something precious. Those early days had no immediate confrontation. Sienna didn't know how to question her mother, and Damien, naive to Blythe's interest, shrugged off any suggestion of impropriety. A few intense arguments broke out between mother and daughter behind closed doors, though. In depositions given months later, neighbors spoke of hearing Blythe shout, "Don't ever accuse me of that again," followed by Sienna's sobs. Yet by morning, the pair would be in the front yard, waving cheerfully. The facade of normalcy was maintained. Blythe was known to volunteer at charity events around the city, and she would often drag Sienna and Damien along, as though curating an image of a stable family. Photos from those events show Blythe dressed elegantly, with Damien on one side and Sienna on the other, but Sienna always appeared slightly out of place, eyes downcast. Once, a local reporter asked them to pose for a photo to highlight mother-daughter volunteer teams, and Blythe angled her body to stand closer to Damien, nearly pushing Sienna aside. The journalist would recall that moment in a taped interview. It felt off. The mom's arm was around the young man's waist, and the daughter just stood there, looking like she'd rather disappear. Months passed. Damien's presence in the Caldwell home grew more frequent, aided by Blythe's invitation for him to use her workspace for college homework. She had a small home office with a plush desk, chair, and shelves of books. Sienna had always been barred from that room. It was Blythe's domain, her oasis, but suddenly, Blythe was encouraging Damien to study there. When Sienna asked about it, Blythe's reply was disarmingly sweet. "He's going to be part of the family, isn't he? I want him to feel comfortable." Sienna's nerves twisted, but she swallowed her misgivings. Damien, for his part, expressed gratitude at such hospitality, telling Sienna, "She's treating me like a son. It's kind of nice, you know?" Unbeknownst to Sienna, Blythe would use those office sessions to question him about his future, poke into his emotional vulnerabilities, and slowly position herself as a confidant. He admitted that his own parents were distant, locked in marital conflicts, and he felt more at home in the Caldwell house than anywhere else. Blythe soaked up every word, storing them for future manipulation, though Damien never suspected it. Blythe's more blatant attempts at seduction began at small intervals, a hand brushing along his shoulder, leaning in to whisper when Sienna left the room, and even a bizarre moment captured by a doorbell camera across the street. Blythe stepping onto the porch in a short satin robe while Damien walked to his car. He barely looked at her, but the footage later became a crucial piece of evidence in the trial, used to establish Blythe's pattern of boundary violations. The tension thickened. Sienna confronted Damien about her suspicions, but he insisted nothing was happening. She confronted her mother, who skillfully deflected with tears, claiming Sienna was imagining things. "What do you think of me?" Blythe hissed. "I love you, and I adore Damien. He's like another child to me." But her tone carried a strange edge. Sienna started losing sleep, popping over-the-counter sleeping pills at night, and her academic performance dropped. Her art teacher noted that Sienna's paintings took on a darker palette, stormy blues and aggressive reds, figures in states of anguish. By the time winter rolled around, the tension in the Caldwell house was practically humming. The final straw, at least from Sienna's perspective, came when Blythe gifted Damien a custom-made leather jacket for his birthday. A jacket that cost far more than Sienna's entire annual clothing allowance. Sienna watched him unwrap it in awe, flustered by the extravagance. He tried to refuse it, but Blythe insisted, "It's nothing, sweetie. I want you to feel special." Sienna walked out of the room in tears. She confronted Damien in the hallway, asking him if he was blind to what was happening. He stammered, "She's just being nice, isn't she?" And that was the moment Sienna realized how naive and trusting he was. She also realized Blythe was dangerously skilled in disguising her intentions. Overhearing their hushed argument, Blythe emerged with a theatrical sob, claiming that she was just trying to do something kind. She went on about how she was misunderstood, how Sienna only saw the worst in her, how she couldn't believe her own daughter would suspect such vile intentions. Sienna felt the weight of guilt. Her mother's manipulative tears had always had that effect, but it didn't erase the sickness in her gut. She resolved to keep her guard up and watch Blythe's every move. The story might have remained a private tragedy, a broken mother-daughter relationship overshadowed by unrequited infatuation, if not for the night Sienna turned 18. Damien by then had grown more aware of Blythe's behavior, though he still clung to the idea that she was a lonely woman who simply poured too much attention into him. He had no clue the depths of Blythe's obsession. On Sienna's 18th birthday, Blythe threw a lavish house party, inviting extended family, neighbors, and a few of Sienna's closest friends. The plan was to celebrate Sienna's adulthood, but the night turned sour after Blythe made repeated toasts referencing Sienna's future marriage to Damien. She teased them, calling them "my two lovebirds," in a tone that felt slightly mocking, as though she believed the entire relationship was hers to command. Sienna drank more than she should have, escaping into the yard with Damien. Blythe followed. At some point they argued. Witnesses overheard Blythe shrieking, "I gave you everything! You're ungrateful!" And the next day Sienna had bruises on her arm. Damien was torn, confused, uncertain which side to believe. His confusion deepened when Blythe collapsed into a fit of sobs, apologizing for her outburst and blaming stress. Sienna stood there, helpless. She told friends the next day, "I'm stuck. She's my mom. Damien doesn't see how she's playing him. I feel like a ghost in my own house." At that point, no one foresaw a homicide, much less a staged death or a twisted marriage. But the seeds were planted. Blythe would later claim in court that she had no premeditated design, but prosecutors painted a different picture, describing Blythe as a calculating woman who resented her daughter for stealing the affection she wanted for herself. One detective described Blythe's mindset as somewhere between a controlling stage mother and a spider weaving a web. Sienna sensed danger but had no tangible proof until an evening a few weeks later when she picked up the house phone, a rarely used landline, and overheard her mother talking in hushed tones to an unknown person, possibly a lawyer or an accomplice. Sienna caught fragments of phrases, "If I can prove she's incompetent," "property transfer." The conversation ended abruptly, and Blythe emerged from the office, looking startled to see Sienna holding the phone. Later, in a tearful text message to a friend, Sienna wrote, "She's planning something. I don't know what, but I need to get out of here." Over the next month, tension escalated. Sienna tried to spend more time at Damien's dorm, but Blythe always found some emergency to pull them back. Some nights, she'd pretend to faint or complain of chest pains, forcing Sienna to rush home. Other times, Blythe threatened to cut off Sienna financially if she disobeyed. Meanwhile, Damien began noticing Blythe's intrusions more blatantly. She would show up at his part-time job unannounced, offering to bring him lunch. He'd receive texts from Blythe at odd hours filled with cryptic messages. "Could you come by tonight? I need help with something in the office." Sienna caught wind of these messages and confronted Damien, who by now was growing uneasy himself. He tried to block Blythe's number, but she used new numbers or borrowed phones from acquaintances. The situation felt claustrophobic. Sienna thought about seeking help, but from whom? The police? She had no proof of a crime, just an overbearing mother who refused to let go. And then it happened. One night, an outburst between mother and daughter ended in physical violence. Blythe slapped Sienna during an argument about curfew and Damien. Sienna threatened to move in with her father, but Blythe threatened to claim Sienna was mentally unstable, that she would lock her up if she tried to leave. Sienna, frightened, turned to Damien, who offered to help her find an off-campus apartment. They began secretly saving money, hoping to disappear once Sienna graduated from high school. That plan might have worked, but Damien confided in Blythe's sister, Aunt Carla, who was known as the black sheep of the family. Carla misunderstood, or perhaps recognized an opportunity to meddle, and told Blythe that Sienna was planning to run away. That set off the final stage of Blythe's spiral. She cornered Damien late one night, rummaging through his phone to find proof of betrayal. A neighbor across the street testified to hearing raised voices, Blythe shouting, "You don't appreciate what I've done for you. You'll never leave me for her, do you hear me?" The neighbor, unsure what it meant, turned off their porch light and ignored it. 2 days later, everything exploded. On the night in question, Sienna made a frantic 911 call, which was traced to the Caldwell house. She was breathless, claiming her mother had done something terrible to Damien. The call ended abruptly. When paramedics and police arrived, no one answered the door. They found the house empty, though lights were on and a dinner table set for two. One chair was overturned, and there was a small pool of blood near the kitchen counter. There was no sign of Sienna or Blythe or Damien. For days, the police scoured the property, finding more traces of blood in the backyard, as though a body had been dragged. The local news lit up with speculation. Had Blythe snapped and harmed them both? Where was Sienna? Where was Damien? A week later, an official death announcement appeared in the local newspaper indicating Sienna Caldwell had died in a tragic accident with funeral arrangements to be held privately. No body was displayed and no details were given about the cause of death. The obituary rattled the community. How had Sienna died? Why weren't the police involved? Detectives reached out to Blythe for a statement, but there was no response. She had disappeared. Rumors swirled. Some believed Sienna had committed suicide, others whispered that mother and daughter had run away together. That was before bizarre stories came from the next town over, where the clerk's office had on record a marriage certificate filed under the names Blythe Caldwell and Damien Reeves. According to a bewildered county clerk, the couple came in to apply for a license, claiming that the bride was 40 and the groom was 20. They provided valid IDs and the marriage license was approved. The application indicated that the bride was widowed, the groom single, and the wedding took place that same afternoon at a little roadside chapel. The clerk remembered them clearly because the groom seemed disoriented and the bride was impatient. When the clerk tried to make small talk, the bride snapped, "Just finish the paperwork." The strangest detail, the bride wore a white dress that seemed too tight, as though borrowed from someone else. She was trembling with excitement. The clerk described the groom's face as pale, hollow-eyed. He barely spoke except to mutter yes when asked if he consented. In the following days, local social media exploded with rumors that Damien had been drugged, coerced, or manipulated into that wedding. Some insisted that Blythe must have threatened him. Others suggested that Damien had a hidden motive, that maybe he'd turned against Sienna. Even more disturbing was the fact that Blythe had announced Sienna's death in a phony obituary, raising questions about Sienna's real whereabouts. Police intensively searched for the couple, eventually tracking them down in a motel near the highway. Blythe was found wearing a cheap wedding band, her hair pinned up, looking strangely triumphant. Damien was seated on the bed staring at the floor. When the police asked about Sienna, Blythe calmly responded, "My daughter is gone. She passed away." The officers pressed for details. Blythe refused to answer, whispering she's at peace now. But the officers noticed the bruises on Damien's arms, fresh needle marks suggesting sedation. They suspected foul play immediately. Damien was taken in for questioning. Initially, he was barely coherent, drifting in and out of a daze. Hospital toxicology reports later found traces of a powerful sedative in his bloodstream. He gradually recounted a nightmare scenario, an argument at the Caldwell house. Sienna threatened to call the police on Blythe, accusing her mother of fraud or theft. Blythe snapped, waving a kitchen knife around. Damien said he tried to intervene, grabbing Blythe's arm. In the chaos, Blythe slashed Damien across the torso, leaving him bleeding. Sienna screamed and tried to apply pressure to the wound, and in the confusion, Blythe hit Sienna with something, a vase maybe. The last thing Damien remembered was Blythe forcing a cloth over his mouth, a chemical smell, then darkness. He woke up in Blythe's car, bandaged with his wound stitched up. Blythe told him Sienna was dead, that it was all his fault, that if he didn't cooperate, she'd tell the police he murdered her daughter. Then she threatened to harm his family if he didn't marry her. Damien, terrified and disoriented, complied out of fear. The police listened in horror, but that didn't explain Sienna's fate. If Sienna was truly dead, where was her body? That question dragged investigators and the media into a vortex of speculation. Blythe refused to say more. She was charged with assault, kidnapping, and suspected homicide, though no corpse had been found. The trial garnered immediate, sensational coverage. Cameras converged on the courthouse while lawyers fought over the unusual circumstances. Meanwhile, a new wave of evidence emerged from Blythe's personal computer, which the police seized. Her search history read like a blueprint for a staged death. How to fake an accident, how to get a death certificate without a body, inheritance rights for adult children, marrying your daughter's fiancé. Each item was more shocking than the last. A detective testified that Blythe had researched lethal doses of sedatives, methods of disposing of a body, and forging documents. The prosecution's theory was that Blythe resented Sienna's relationship with Damien, attempted to eliminate Sienna, forced a marriage with Damien, and planned to vanish with whatever assets she could claim from Sienna's father's trust. It was a mind-boggling scenario, but the question still loomed. Where was Sienna? Then, in a move that shocked even the prosecution, Blythe's defense lawyers filed a motion claiming Sienna was alive and had orchestrated the entire scenario to frame her mother. They produced a bizarre statement from Blythe: "Sienna is a disturbed young woman who faked everything to punish me for refusing to support her marriage. I only married Damien because I feared for my life. Sienna threatened to kill me if I didn't comply." It was a twisted narrative with no evidence, but it did inject confusion into the case. The public, voracious for any scrap of drama, devoured each new twist. On talk shows, pundits debated whether Sienna had run away to start a new life. Others insisted that Blythe had murdered her daughter in cold blood and hidden the body, perhaps burying it in the backyard or discarding it somewhere remote. More rumors circulated that Sienna was locked away in the Caldwell house's basement. Though the police found nothing, a few believed Sienna had died accidentally and Blythe panicked. None of it fully explained the forced marriage or the fake obituary. The trial proceeded, overshadowed by the missing person at the center of the whole fiasco. Damien testified looking haunted and wearing a bandage around his torso. He described how Blythe forced him into a motel, injected him with sedatives, threatened him with the same fate as Sienna if he didn't sign the marriage license. His voice shook as he recounted the terrifying moment he found out Sienna was dead. Though Blythe never showed him a body, he recalled her gloating, "Now that she's gone, you're mine." The court gasped at that line. The prosecutor asked if Damien believed Sienna was truly dead. He answered through tears, I don't know." That single admission of uncertainty spurred a deeper search. Was it possible that Sienna was alive somewhere, the victim of kidnapping or forced disappearance? Police pored over security footage, credit card records, phone pings. Nothing indicated Sienna was alive or traveling. It was as though she vanished. Blythe's face remained impassive throughout those proceedings, except for occasional moments where she dabbed her eyes with a tissue, trying to appear the victim. But the biggest reveal came from an unlikely source, an old friend of Blythe's, a woman named Patricia, who used to meet Blythe for coffee. Patricia recalled Blythe mentioning a cabin her family once owned in a remote area by a lake, passed down from Blythe's grandparents. The property records showed Blythe still had partial ownership, though she'd never disclosed it. Detectives arranged a search. The place was deserted, dusty, with no electricity. They found an old generator in a locked shed behind the cabin, but it was empty. Just as they were about to leave, one officer noticed fresh tire tracks leading beyond the property line to a clearing in the woods. They followed them to a dirt patch. The ground looked recently disturbed. Forensic teams excavated the site. There they discovered a shallow grave, its occupant wrapped in a plastic tarp. Everyone feared it was Sienna. The remains were female, but initial analysis suggested the body was an older adult. Shockingly, not Sienna. The coroner soon identified the corpse as Blythe's estranged mother, who had died years earlier under unclear circumstances. That discovery deepened the mystery. Had Blythe staged her own mother's burial to practice disposing of a body? Or was she covering up an entirely different crime? The questions multiplied, but Sienna remained missing. Media outlets captured every twist in breathless updates. The story was so outrageous that national networks sent reporters to the small city. The local courthouse had reporters camped out every day, peppering attorneys with shouted questions. Where is Sienna? Is she alive? Did Blythe murder her own mother too? The tension of the trial built to a fever pitch. Blythe was charged with homicide in connection to her mother's remains, but the timeline made it hard to prove murder. The prosecution focused on kidnapping, assault, and potential murder of Sienna. Though they had no body, they painted a damning picture of Blythe, a controlling mother who viewed her daughter as competition and the daughter's boyfriend as a prize. They argued that Blythe manipulated Damien, forced him into marriage, and faked Sienna's death to claim property rights. Sienna, after all, was the primary heir to her father's trust, which Blythe could only access if Sienna died childless. The marriage to Damien was a bizarre attempt to seize the future Sienna had planned for herself. Inside the courtroom, tension crackled with each witness. Damien gave harrowing testimony about the night he was assaulted. A forensic analyst described blood evidence in the Caldwell kitchen. A data specialist revealed Blythe's search history, which included forgeries of official documents. Another detective recounted Blythe's attempted bribes, offering hush money if he'd stop searching the property. Through it all, Blythe sat dignified, wearing pastel suits, hair neatly styled, occasionally shaking her head in denial. Every so often, she'd shoot Damien a venomous glare, as though blaming him for her predicament. The defense tried to paint Blythe as a victim of mental illness and insisted no one could confirm Sienna's death since there was no body. They claimed Sienna orchestrated everything to sabotage her mother. They pointed to sporadic sightings from people who swore they saw Sienna at a gas station or an ATM, though none were verified by video evidence. The case seemed to teeter on the question, is Sienna truly dead? Then came the bombshell. A tip led police to a battered minivan behind an abandoned warehouse. Inside, they found Sienna alive but barely. She was malnourished, tied with rope around her wrists, drifting in and out of consciousness. She was rushed to a hospital where doctors found she'd been given sedatives and was borderline hypothermic. It appeared she'd been left there to die. She was too weak to speak at first, but eventually she gave a statement that stunned everyone. Blythe had attacked Damien, threatened to kill them both, forced Sienna into the minivan, and driven her out of the city. Blythe was on a phone call with someone Sienna didn't recognize, arranging a handoff. When Blythe left Sienna alone to retrieve something, Sienna managed to crawl away, but she was too weak to go far. Blythe found her, knocked her unconscious, and presumably left her in the van. The timeline was unclear, but it suggested Blythe had stashed Sienna away while forging a death certificate. Sienna had no idea about the forced marriage. When the prosecutors revealed that detail, Sienna reportedly burst into tears. She kept repeating, "She married him? My own mother married Damien?" With Sienna's recovery, the missing pieces finally came together. She'd survived an attempted murder, though details were murky due to her partial memory loss from sedation and trauma. She provided enough coherent testimony to destroy Blythe's defense. The public watched in morbid fascination as the mother now stood accused of attempted murder, abduction, and forced marriage. The media branded Blythe with every horrific label imaginable, someone who tried to steal her daughter's life, literally and figuratively. The day Sienna testified in court, a hush fell over the room. She walked in on trembling legs, escorted by a victim advocate. The press flashed cameras as she took the stand. Her voice shook as she described the terror, how she tried to protect Damien when Blythe grabbed the knife, how Blythe turned on her, eyes blazing with something akin to hatred. She told me I was worthless, that I took everything from her, that Damien belonged to her now. Sienna's eyes brimmed with tears. She said she was going to make sure I disappeared so no one would ever believe me. Court transcripts show Blythe erupted at that testimony, screaming from the defense table, "You're lying! I gave you life, and this is how you repay me?" The judge threatened to hold her in contempt. The entire courtroom saw Blythe's icy composure melt into rage. Damien sat in the audience, weeping quietly, a victim himself, though the press painted him with a wide range of judgments, from gullible boy to complicit fiancé. After Sienna's testimony, the prosecution had more than enough to press for a maximum sentence. The detective who first responded to the 911 call was recalled to the stand, describing how he found the Caldwell's house, the partially consumed dinner, blood spatter in the kitchen, an open basement door leading to a room where rope and duct tape were discovered. Experts testified about the sedation traces in Damien and Sienna's bloodstream. Even Blythe's sister Carla took the stand, albeit reluctantly, to discuss Blythe's manipulative streak and how she had set her sights on Damien from the beginning. Carla's testimony was contradictory at times. She seemed guilt-ridden about tipping Blythe off to Sienna's plan to move out, but her words sealed the impression that Blythe's obsession and cunning stretched back months, if not years. Then came the wedding photo. The prosecution displayed it in court, a hastily taken Polaroid from the roadside chapel. Blythe in white, forcing a smile. Damien in a simple shirt and slacks, eyes vacant, clearly not a willing participant. On the back of the photo was a timestamp showing it took place days after Sienna's fake obituary ran. Gasps rippled through the courtroom because it stood as final proof of Blythe's twisted plot. She declared her daughter dead, then married the boyfriend. In cross-examination, Blythe's lawyer tried to spin it as a coerced union forced by some third party, but the evidence was overwhelmingly against them. Damien's signature, albeit shaky, was on the marriage certificate. Blythe's fingerprints were all over the chapel's ledger. The only question was whether the jury would find Blythe guilty on all counts or lesser ones. Blythe's attempts to sob and claim innocence fell flat. The final blow came when the prosecution revealed Blythe's purchase of life insurance policies that covered Sienna as well as Damien. That left no doubt in the jury's mind that Blythe planned this for financial gain as well. The only surprise was that she didn't kill Damien too, though it seemed she wanted him alive for her bizarre conjugal fantasies and potential claim on Sienna's inheritance. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. They returned with a unanimous guilty verdict on charges of attempted murder, kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon, forced marriage, and a litany of lesser offenses including forgery and fraud. Because they still didn't have conclusive evidence that Blythe had killed her own mother, that charge remained open for further investigation, but it was overshadowed by her convictions in the crimes against Sienna and Damien. Blythe maintained her innocence even as the sentence was read. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Gasps and cheers echoed in the courtroom. Sienna broke down, sobbing in relief. Damien clutched at his own hair, trembling. Reporters rushed to cover the reaction. Victim advocates shielded Sienna and Damien from the cameras. To the end, Blythe refused to acknowledge wrongdoing. She spat out words of contempt, cursing Sienna for destroying her life. The judge had bailiffs remove her from the courtroom. Once Blythe was gone, the reporters swarmed. They wanted to know how Sienna felt, what Damien planned to do, whether they would try to salvage any semblance of a relationship. It was an unthinkable question. How do two traumatized young people move on from an ordeal where a mother turned into a monster? There would be no easy answers. For a while, Sienna went into hiding, living with extended family out of state. She gave one short interview to a local station, her voice quavering as she said, "I just want to recover, to feel safe again." Damien disappeared from public view as well, though it was rumored he checked himself into a psychiatric facility to cope with the guilt and confusion. Their relationship ended, overshadowed by the shared trauma. Some in the media tried to sensationalize them as star-crossed lovers, but the reality was far more grim. They were two victims, each scarred by the same predator. Months later, during Blythe's official sentencing, the court allowed victim impact statements. Sienna, her hands shaking, addressed her mother in a trembling voice. She said, "I loved you. I wanted you to be proud of me, to support me. You betrayed me in every way I never thought possible. I can't hate you because I can't process that you were ever truly my mother. I hope one day I heal, but you'll have to live with what you did." Blythe refused to look at her, staring at the floor. When it was Damien's turn, he could barely speak. He managed to say, "You destroyed my trust in so many ways. I only wish we could have seen what you were planning. I'm sorry we didn't stop you sooner." Blythe's only response was a hissed whisper of lies captured by the courtroom microphone. She was then led away, her manacles clanking as a hush settled over the onlookers. Afterward, rumors flared that Blythe had threatened to harm Sienna's father if Sienna testified. Others claimed Blythe belonged to a secret group that helped parents manipulate custody and trust funds. Nothing was proven. The surest fact was that Blythe had orchestrated a labyrinth of lies, culminating in that horrifying night of violence and forced nuptials. Sienna vanished from public view shortly after, changing her name, finishing school elsewhere. Over time, sporadic sightings of her or Damien popped up, but no official statements were made. The press eventually moved on to other scandals. Maplewood Drive returned to an uneasy calm. The Caldwell house went on the market, languished unsold for over a year, then was finally bought by someone who likely didn't realize its dark past. Yet the fallout reverberated in smaller ways. Sienna's old high school displayed a mural she painted in her senior year, dark shapes, swirling colors. Viewed now as a tragic foreshadowing, the newlyweds who replaced the Caldwells on Maplewood sometimes receive stray mail addressed to Blythe or Sienna. The city's rumor mill occasionally revived the story, especially after any new detail emerged from Blythe's prison saga. Blythe herself wrote multiple letters insisting on her innocence, claiming she was set up, that Sienna was the real villain. Psychologists who evaluated Blythe concluded she had a severe narcissistic personality disorder, borderline psychopathy, with delusions of grandeur. She refused therapy in prison, lashing out at staff. Eventually, the letters stopped, replaced by silence. Over the next year, the tabloids tried to spin the story into salacious headlines, but it was the long-form docudramas that found real success. One streaming network produced a multi-episode special featuring reenactments of Blythe's obsessive grooming of Damien. Actors portrayed Blythe as a sultry, manipulative figure with a sweet facade. Critics argued it was exploitative, but viewers devoured every minute. People whispered about a rumored cameo from Sienna in the final episode, but it never materialized. Instead, the show ended with black and white text explaining that Sienna had changed her identity and was focusing on rebuilding her life. A final voiceover intoned, "Sometimes the people meant to protect us become our biggest threat. This is the cautionary tale of a mother who crossed every boundary to claim the love she believed she deserved." Sienna's father, who'd been largely absent during her childhood, surfaced only to give a single statement to the press, lamenting that he never realized how dangerous Blythe had become. He expressed regret for not being more present. Sienna refused to speak with him. In private messages, she told a close friend that she couldn't handle any more betrayal. Damien, meanwhile, started traveling, trying to outrun the nightmares. In quiet, personal moments, he admitted to a counselor that he still blamed himself for not seeing Blythe's manipulations earlier, for letting the mother-daughter tension escalate until someone nearly died. The counselor assured him he was a victim, but guilt rarely listens to reason. Time would have to do the healing. As for Blythe, she adapted to prison life poorly. She clashed with other inmates, earning a reputation for stirring trouble. She scrawled journal entries that the prison later released to the courts when appealing for mental health reviews. In those entries, Blythe ranted about how Damien belonged to her, how Sienna was ungrateful, how she deserved to get what she wanted. Psychiatrists concluded she lacked remorse or empathy. The appeals process went nowhere. Blythe remained behind bars, a specter of the woman who once hosted charity events and volunteered for local committees. She became a symbol of a mother's betrayal gone to an extreme, a cautionary figure in viral documentaries about familial abuse and obsession. Despite the horrifying details, the story eventually slipped into local legend, recalled in hushed tones whenever Maplewood Drive was mentioned. The house, rumored to be haunted, underwent multiple renovations. The backyard, once scoured for evidence, was landscaped with new flower beds. Whoever lived there sometimes spotted curious passers-by peeking through the fence, searching for ghostly reminders of what had happened. In time, the memory faded, replaced by new headlines, but for those who lived it. Sienna, Damien, the detectives, the prosecutors, and the neighbors who overheard screams in the night, the scars remained etched in their minds. One detective, who retired soon after the case, said in a taped interview, "I've seen evil before, but this was different. This was a mother turning on her child in the most twisted way imaginable, all for lust and control. Sometimes I still dream about that house. I can still smell the perfume she wore, the way the air felt cold in the kitchen. It's like a nightmare that never leaves you." Sienna, who'd started therapy, occasionally shared glimpses of her healing journey with a small circle of friends. She found it difficult to trust anyone, to believe she could have a healthy relationship. She battled depression and PTSD triggered by any mention of wedding rings or mother-daughter relationships. In a private audio diary, she described feeling haunted by the image of Blythe in that wedding dress, an image that had surfaced in court photos. Sienna's nightmares often replayed Blythe's voice saying, "Damien is mine now," followed by Sienna's muffled screams. She worked with a trauma counselor who encouraged her to paint her nightmares, turning them into visual expressions. Over time, her paintings shifted from dark, violent reds to softer hues, signifying some measure of hope. It was a long road to normalcy, if such a thing was even possible after the betrayal she'd endured. Damien, in a separate corner of the country, also sought therapy. He tried to return to college, but found the campus hallways triggered flashbacks of Blythe stalking him. He tried online classes for a while. He reached out to Sienna once, leaving a voicemail that said, "I'm so sorry for everything. I hope we can forgive each other someday." Whether they spoke or met in person afterward remained unknown. Speculation ran rampant that they might eventually reconcile, but those who knew them said the trauma was too deep. They represented a past so tangled with manipulation and violence that forging a future together seemed impossible. Their mutual acquaintances hoped they could at least find friendship and healing, if not romance, but time would tell. In the city's collective memory, the case became known as the mother's seduction. Tabloids gleefully sensationalized it. Old ladies at barbershops whispered about how you never really know what goes on in a well-kept suburban house. The local high school incorporated lessons on recognizing grooming and manipulation into their health curriculum, referencing the tragedy as a cautionary tale. In a sense, Blythe's crime spurred a wider conversation about emotional abuse, parental boundaries, and the dangers lurking behind closed doors. Yet, for all the cautionary lessons, it was still a horrifying testament to how far one twisted individual would go to satisfy obsession and greed. Even the county records were permanently marked by the contradictory documents: Sienna's bogus death certificate and Blythe's legally recognized marriage to Damien. A clerk eventually annotated both records. Fraudulent, subject to criminal conviction, effectively nullifying the marriage and withdrawing the death certificate. But the paper trail remained a bizarre artifact, a testament to how Blythe's manipulations temporarily fooled an entire bureaucratic system. A reporter once quipped she faked one death and orchestrated another life all in the same week. It was a macabre joke that captured the essence of Blythe's brazen deception. For Sienna, the final note of closure came when she was legally declared the sole beneficiary of her father's trust. Once she turned 21, she used a portion of the money to cover therapy costs, medical bills, and relocation expenses. She donated another portion to organizations supporting survivors of domestic abuse and family violence, hoping to turn her personal nightmare into something that could help others. In an anonymous letter to one of those organizations, she wrote, "I survived because I found a way out. My story is ugly, but I'm still here, and I want others to know there's a chance to rebuild." She signed the letter with a pseudonym, refusing to let her real name be used publicly again. Reports indicate Blythe eventually tried to contact Sienna from prison, sending letters that were never delivered. Sienna made it clear she wanted no contact. The prison staff upheld a no-contact request. Blythe apparently became even more erratic after realizing her letters went unanswered, directing her rage at guards and fellow inmates. She was placed in solitary confinement multiple times for violent outbursts. A few tabloids sensationalized the scuffles, describing Blythe as an inmate who sharpened toothbrushes into makeshift shivs, though official prison records remained sealed. Whether or not those sensational stories were accurate, her life behind bars was by all accounts miserable. As time marched on, the city replaced old mysteries with new ones. New developments were built, fresh tragedies occurred, and the Caldwell case became another footnote in local lore. Yet it never truly vanished from collective memory. Podcasts occasionally resurrected it in episodes with titles like The Mommy Dearest to End All Mommy Dearests. Documentaries recapped it with reenactments and ominous music, layering on new theories. But the essential truth was established in court. Blythe Caldwell attacked and nearly killed her daughter's boyfriend, staged her daughter's death, then forced the boyfriend into a sham marriage, all driven by twisted lust and the lure of financial control. Sienna survived by a miracle, and Damien narrowly escaped a fate that might have ended in a grave next to Sienna's if Blythe had her way. No matter how many retellings circulated, the horror of that central betrayal never faded. Sienna, in her quiet anonymity, still faced nightmares. In therapy, she worked through them, painting and writing, forging small connections with supportive friends. She sometimes revisited the memories of the good times she had with her mother before everything turned dark. Playing games in the backyard, making pancakes on Sundays. The typical mother-daughter laughter. She wondered if any of that had ever been real, or if it was just a veneer over Blythe's pathological need for control. Therapists told her it was common to grieve the mother she thought she had, a grieving process that might last a lifetime. Some days she felt a glimmer of hope that she could move on. Other days she drowned in anger and sorrow, thinking of the moment Blythe told her, "You're nothing without me." Yet in the midst of that pain, Sienna embraced the truth. She was free. Blythe no longer loomed over every aspect of her life. Damien was free too, forging his own uncertain path. The monstrous chapter of Blythe Caldwell's manipulation was over. The only question remaining was how each survivor would write their next chapters. For Sienna, that meant looking inward, finding love that wasn't tangled in trauma, building a life that wasn't overshadowed by betrayal. For Damien, it meant shedding his guilt, letting himself believe he deserved to be happy despite falling prey to Blythe's illusions. And for Blythe, there was no next chapter, just a cold prison cell where she'd spend her days. At the city courthouse, the official trial transcript spanned thousands of pages. Yet the last few lines captured the essence of the tragedy. The judge's words echoed, "This court finds the defendant guilty of crimes that defy the boundaries of normal comprehension. We hope this brings some measure of closure to the victims. May justice be served." Sienna's eyes, as captured in a stray photograph, were weary but resolute. She'd done what she had to do, testified, fought for her life, and walked out of that courtroom with some measure of power reclaimed. The mother who nearly destroyed her was carted off in chains, still muttering claims of innocence. In a final news interview, the prosecutor stated, "Our duty was to seek justice. We believe justice has been served, but none of us can restore what that family lost." That somber note resonated through the community, reminding everyone that some wounds never fully heal. In the end, the city moved forward while those closest to the tragedy carried their private scars. Sienna eventually found the strength to create something new out of the wreckage. She enrolled in online art classes under her new name, forging quiet friendships that had no knowledge of her past. Maybe she'd tell them one day, maybe not. She painted scenes of rebirth, seedlings sprouting through ashes, broken chains lying in the corner of a bright canvas. She found solace in the act of creation. Some nights, the nightmares persisted, and she'd wake drenched in sweat, hearing Blythe's mocking laughter. But dawn would come, and with it, the steady beat of her heart reminding her she was still alive. She had outlasted the darkness. Over time, her hope took firmer root, and though the memory of betrayal never vanished, she learned to live with it. She'd been forced to face the cruelest twist of fate, a mother who lusted after her own daughter's boyfriend, faking her child's death to claim him. But Sienna had survived the unimaginable. That survival, in itself, became her greatest testament, an unspoken story of resilience, echoing in every brush stroke and every new breath she dared to draw.